Racist woman in the frame. Drug planted in black boy reveals secrets. Hello. You are very welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. In the quaint town of Maplewood, the sun cast a warm glow over the community center where preparations for the upcoming annual event were in full swing. Claire, a prominent businesswoman known for her sharp tongue and unyielding opinions, stood at the edge of the rehearsal space, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She watched intently as Malik, a bright and promising student, practiced his speech for the event. His confidence radiated, and the way he spoke with passion about his dreams thrilled many in attendance. However, for Claire, this was not a moment to celebrate. "Look at him," Claire murmured to her friend Linda, who stood beside her. "This is exactly what I was worried about. Why should someone like him take center stage when there are far more deserving candidates?" Her voice dripped with disdain, revealing the prejudice that lurked beneath her polished exterior. Linda raised an eyebrow, glancing at Malik. "He seems talented, Claire. Maybe he deserves a chance to shine." Claire scoffed, shaking her head. "You don't get it. People like him should know their place. This town has worked hard to maintain its image. We can't let one kid ruin everything." As the rehearsals continued, Claire's mind raced with thoughts of losing her influence in the community. The event was her opportunity to showcase her business and solidify her status. If Malik succeeded, it could overshadow her efforts and shift the community's focus away from her. A seed of desperation took root in her heart, and an insidious plan began to form. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire found herself in her quiet home office, staring at Malik's photo on the event flyer. An idea, dark and twisted, slithered into her mind. She envisioned a way to eliminate the threat he posed, a way to ensure he wouldn't be a part of the event at all. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and made a call to her accomplice, a dubious figure who had connections that extended into the underbelly of the town. "I need you to plant something on Malik," she instructed, her voice cold and calculated. "Something that will get him in serious trouble. Something that will make sure he's out of the picture before the event." The accomplice's voice crackled through the line, skepticism lacing his tone. "Are you sure about this? This could backfire, Claire." "I'm sure. Just do it." "I can't let him ruin everything I've worked for," she snapped, her resolve hardening as she hung up the phone. The next day at school, Malik walked through the halls with an air of excitement, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He was eager to showcase his talents at the community event, believing wholeheartedly that he could inspire others. He laughed with his friends, shared ideas, and felt a sense of belonging that he had longed for. However, this blissful state was about to shatter. As he opened his locker, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Malik turned to find two police officers approaching, their expressions serious and stern. Confusion washed over him as they called his name. "Malik Johnson, we need to talk to you," one of the officers said, his tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Is there a problem, officers?" Malik asked, his heart racing. "It's regarding a serious matter. We have reason to believe you are involved in drug trafficking," the second officer replied, producing a small bag of white powder from his pocket. "This was found in your backpack." Malik's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? That's impossible. I don't know how that got there." His voice trembled as panic set in. He felt the ground beneath him shift, the walls closing in as he grappled with the reality of the accusation. "This is a grave matter, Malik. You need to come with us," the first officer said, reaching for his arm. As he was led away, Malik's mind raced with questions and fear. How could this happen? What had he done to deserve this? His thoughts turned to Claire, the woman whose influence loomed over the town like a dark cloud. Unbeknownst to him, Claire watched from a distance, a smirk creeping across her face as she savored her triumph, blissfully unaware of the chaos her actions would ultimately unleash. Ethan stepped into the small town of Maplewood with a determined look on his face. He had heard whispers about Claire, the influential businesswoman whose shadow loomed over the community. As the new detective, He felt an unyielding sense of duty to uncover the truth behind the recent accusations against Malik, a promising student who had suddenly found himself at the center of a scandal. Walking through the halls of Maplewood High, Ethan noticed the tension in the air. Students whispered and exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of fear and uncertainty. He approached a group of Malik's classmates, hoping to gather more information. "Hey there," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative. "I'm Detective Ethan. Can I ask you a few questions about Malik?" One of the girls, Sarah, hesitated before speaking. "I don't want to get involved. Everyone's saying he's guilty." Her voice trailed off, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of the situation. "I get that, but I need to know what you think. Malik's future is on the line here." A boy named Jason, who had been silent until now, finally piped up. "Malik's a good guy. He wouldn't do anything like that. But Claire, she's powerful around here. Everyone listens to her. Why do you think she'd do something like this?" Ethan pressed, sensing a deeper story. Jason shrugged, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I heard she didn't like him getting all the attention for the event. She wants to be the one in the spotlight." Ethan filed that information away, knowing it could be crucial. He decided to pay a visit to Claire, the woman at the center of this growing storm. As he approached her upscale office, he felt a mix of anticipation and caution. He had seen her name in the local papers, always associated with charity events and community initiatives. But he had also sensed the underlying tension from the students. When he stepped inside, Claire greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Detective Ethan, how lovely to meet you," she said, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "What brings you to my office?" "I'm investigating the situation involving Malik," Ethan replied, maintaining eye contact. "I'd like to hear your perspective on the recent events." "Malik?" Claire feigned surprise, leaning back in her chair. "Such a talented boy. It's a shame he's gotten himself into trouble. I just hope this doesn't affect the event. The community needs to come together." Ethan could sense the thinly veiled disdain in her words. "You seem to have a vested interest in the event. Is there anything you'd like to share that might shed light on this situation?" Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, and she crossed her arms defensively. "I don't see how I could possibly be involved in this. I'm just a concerned citizen, detective. But if you're looking for a scapegoat, it seems Malik fits the bill." Ethan felt his instincts sharpen. There was something about her demeanor that felt off. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a glint of something metallic peeking out from behind a stack of papers on her desk. He casually adjusted his position to get a better look, but Claire's gaze followed his. "Is there something you're looking for, detective?" she asked, her tone now icy. Ethan shook his head, forcing a smile. "Just making sure I have all the information I need. Thank you for your time." He stepped out, his mind racing with questions about Claire's true motives. Later that evening, he received an anonymous tip that led him back to the school. A nondescript envelope slipped under his door contained a note that read, "Look closer at Claire. She's not what she seems." Ethan's heart raced as he contemplated the implications. He decided to dig deeper into Claire's past. As he pored over the details, he began to see a pattern emerge, one that hinted at buried secrets and old wounds. The town's facade of harmony was starting to crack, revealing the prejudices that had been simmering beneath the surface. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan prepared for the next step in his investigation, knowing that the answers he sought lay buried in the shadows of Maplewood's seemingly perfect community. Ethan stood in front of Claire's modest house, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the neatly manicured lawn. He had a feeling that this visit would be pivotal to unraveling the tangled web of deceit surrounding Malik's case. As he approached the front door, he could hear Claire's voice drifting from inside. Cheerful, almost too cheerful. It was as though she was trying to mask something deeper beneath her polished exterior. "Ethan, what a surprise!" Claire exclaimed, opening the door with a bright smile. "I was just getting ready for the community event. Come in, please." "Thank you, Claire." I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, Ethan replied, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked cookies, a stark contrast to the tension that lay beneath their surface conversation. As they moved to her living room, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, scrutinized by the walls adorned with family photos and community accolades. I wanted to discuss the event and how we can make it more inclusive, Ethan said, trying to keep the conversation on track. Claire nodded enthusiastically, but he could see her eyes flicker with something else. Fear? Guilt? He decided to press on with his investigation subtly. By the way, Claire, I've heard some things about Malik. What's your opinion on him? He asked, watching her reaction closely. Oh, Malik? He's a bright young man, but I think the event might be too much for him. You know how these things can be. Not everyone is cut out for the spotlight, Claire said, her tone dismissive, yet strained. Ethan noted the way she avoided making eye contact. Is that so? I've heard he's quite talented. It seems like the community is excited to see him shine, Ethan replied, keeping his voice neutral, probing gently. Excited? Maybe. But it's not about talent alone, Ethan. There's a lot more at play here, she sighed, crossing her arms defensively. Ethan recognized a hint of something deeper in her words, perhaps a fear of losing control over the narrative she had crafted in Maplewood. Ethan then steered the conversation toward the event's preparations, all the while observing Claire's demeanor. As he casually scanned the room, something caught his eye, a glimmer of leather peeking out from beneath a stack of papers on her desk. His curiosity piqued, and he excused himself to the restroom, making a brief detour to investigate. In the quiet of her office, he discovered a small, weathered diary. The cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline. He thumbed through it and quickly realized it was filled with Claire's intimate thoughts and reflections. Why would she keep this hidden? He muttered to himself, his heart racing. The entries revealed a troubled past, trauma, isolation, and a deep-seated fear of being outshone, particularly by those who were different from her. One particular entry read, I can't let anyone take away what I've built. They'll never understand the sacrifices I've made. Ethan's mind raced as he processed the implications. Claire's struggles had molded her into someone who perpetuated the very prejudice she had once experienced. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy mixed with disdain. Regardless of her past, her actions had consequences, and Malik's life was now spiraling into chaos because of her choices. Ethan? Claire called from the other room, snapping him back to reality. He quickly closed the diary and slipped it back under the papers, taking a deep breath to compose himself before returning to her. Sorry, just had to wash my hands, he said, feigning nonchalance. Everything okay? Claire asked, her tone laced with an edge of suspicion. Yeah, all good, he replied, forcing a smile. I was just thinking about how important it is to understand each other's backgrounds. It helps us create a more inclusive community. Claire's expression hardened slightly. Some people will always resist change, Ethan. We have to be careful about who we uplift, she stated, her voice firm. Ethan studied her, recognizing the walls she had built around herself. Or maybe we need to challenge those walls, Claire. The community deserves the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. She stiffened at his words, the tension between them palpable. You don't know what you're talking about, she shot back, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. Maybe I do, Claire. And maybe it's time to face those truths, he replied, his voice steady. As he left her house, the weight of the diary felt heavy in his mind. The revelations had opened a door into Claire's psyche, and he knew that understanding her past was crucial in the fight for Malik's justice. Malik sat at the edge of the schoolyard, his heart racing and his mind swirling with confusion. The vibrant colors of autumn leaves danced around him, but all he could feel was the weight of the accusations hanging over his head. He glanced at the groups of students scattered around, their laughter ringing in his ears like a cruel reminder of what he had lost. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted in his life just days before. Malik, Zoe called out, her voice cutting through the din of chatter. She rushed over, her brows furrowed with concern. I heard what happened. You've got to tell me everything. Malik sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't even know where to start, Zoe. One moment I was just rehearsing for the event, and the next, I was being dragged away by the police. It doesn't make any sense. Zoe frowned, her determination rising. It's not fair. You didn't do anything wrong. We have to do something about this. You need support, and we can't let Claire get away with this. I don't want to cause more trouble, Malik replied, his voice barely above a whisper. People are already talking. They think I'm guilty. Zoe shook her head fiercely. We can't let her win. We have to stand up for what's right. I'm organizing a protest. We need to show everyone that you're innocent and that this is about more than just you. It's about standing against racism and injustice. Malik looked into her eyes, seeing the fire of conviction burning within her. A protest? Do you really think that will change anything? It has to, she insisted. If we don't speak up, who will? We can't let Claire control the narrative. You deserve to be heard. As Malik pondered her words, he felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. Okay, let's do it. I'll support you, whatever it takes. With Zoe's plan in motion, the days leading up to the protest were a whirlwind of flyers, social media posts, and whispered conversations in the hallways. Malik's classmates were divided. Some rallied behind him, while others echoed Claire's accusations, fueled by fear and the weight of community bias. As the day approached, Malik felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. On the morning of the protest, students gathered outside the school, holding signs that read, "Justice for Malik," and "Stop the Racism." Zoe stood at the front, her voice ringing clear as she rallied the crowd. We are here today to support our friend, who has been wronged. This isn't just about Malik. It's about standing against the hatred that plagues our community. Malik stood off to the side, watching the students chant and cheer. His heart swelled with gratitude, but also fear. What if the school administration tried to shut them down? What if Claire retaliated? Just then, a teacher approached the group, her expression stern. You all need to disperse. This protest is disrupting school activities. Zoe stepped forward, her chin held high. We have the right to express ourselves. Malik has been falsely accused, and we won't be silenced. The teacher hesitated, glancing at the growing crowd. You need to take it to the principal's office. This isn't the place for this. The tension in the air thickened as students murmured among themselves, unsure of what to do. Malik's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Let's move to the front steps, Zoe shouted, her voice cutting through the uncertainty. We'll make our stand there. With a united front, the students marched to the front of the school, their voices rising in solidarity. Malik felt a surge of empowerment as he joined them, the fear beginning to melt away. They were fighting not just for him, but for everyone who had ever felt the sting of injustice. As they gathered on the steps, Malik could see his classmates, some of whom had previously avoided him, now chanting his name. Malik, Malik, Malik. The rhythm of their voices resonated in his chest, pushing back against the shadows of doubt that had haunted him. Zoe turned to Malik, her expression fierce with determination. This is just the beginning. We are going to fight for your truth, no matter what. You're not alone. Malik nodded, feeling a sense of belonging wash over him. Thank you, Zoe. I don't know what I would do without you. As the protest continued, Malik realized that together, they were not just combating an accusation. They were challenging the very fabric of prejudice that had woven itself into their community. And in that moment, he understood that the fight for justice was not solely his burden to bear. It was a collective journey toward a brighter future, one that he was now ready to embrace. Ethan stood in the dim light of the coffee shop, his mind racing with the revelations he had uncovered in Claire's diary. The weight of the truth hung heavily on him, pressing against his chest like a stone. He had expected the confrontation with Claire to be intense, but he was unprepared for the emotional turmoil it would unleash in him. As he entered Claire's office, he found her seated behind a large oak desk, her expression calm but her eyes betraying a flicker of apprehension. The air was thick with tension, and Ethan could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on them both. "Detective Ethan," Claire began, her voice smooth yet laced with a hint of defensiveness. "What brings you here today? I hope this isn't about that unfortunate incident with Malik. It's all so outrageous, don't you think?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, studying her face for any sign of guilt. "I've been looking into Malik's case more deeply, Claire, and I found something that concerns me greatly." He paused, gauging her reaction before continuing. "Your diary. It has some troubling entries that reveal your past and the biases you've harbored." Claire's demeanor shifted instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips tightened into a thin line. "My past has nothing to do with this. I don't see how it's relevant," she retorted, her voice rising defensively. "It's very relevant," Ethan pressed, trying to keep his tone steady. "You've allowed your personal experiences to dictate how you view others, and that's dangerous. By planting those drugs in Malik's backpack, you've tried to destroy a promising young man's life based solely on your prejudices." Claire stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "I didn't plant anything. This is absurd, Ethan. You're grasping at straws," she exclaimed, anger flashing across her face. "People in this community are starting to see through the facade, Claire," he continued, undeterred. "You may have managed to manipulate the narrative for a while, but truth has a way of surfacing. The more you deny it, the louder it becomes." Outside, the noise of the community meeting began to swell, echoing through the walls of the office. Claire's face paled slightly as she realized the implications of what Ethan was saying. "I have a reputation to protect," she said, her voice trembling now. "You don't understand what's at stake here. This community needs strong leadership, and leadership built on fear and prejudice is not strong." "It's weak," he interrupted, his voice rising slightly to match her fervor. "You've instilled divisiveness among the people, all to maintain your grasp on power. You've turned them against Malik without a second thought." Claire's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment, Ethan saw a crack in her armor. "I did what I thought was best for the community," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I thought I was protecting them. By scapegoating an innocent boy?" Ethan challenged. "Your actions have consequences, Claire. The community is starting to divide between those who see Malik for who he truly is and those who cling to your distorted version of events. And you can't control it anymore." The tension in the room was palpable, and Claire's expression shifted from defiance to desperation. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to take responsibility," he replied firmly. "You need to acknowledge your actions, not just for Malik's sake, but for your own redemption. This community deserves better than the lies you've spread." As he spoke, the doors swung open, and a group of concerned citizens entered, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and determination. Zoe led the charge, her expression resolute as she glanced back at Ethan, sensing the weight of the moment. "Ethan, Claire," Zoe called out, her voice cutting through the tension. "We need to talk about the protest. People are rallying behind Malik, and we want to make sure we're doing this right." Claire's expression hardened again, the walls rising back up around her. "This is not the time for protests or demonstrations," she snapped, her authority reasserting itself. "We need to focus on unity, not division." Zoe stepped forward, unwavering. "Unity doesn't come from silencing the truth, Claire. It comes from confronting it. We're tired of living in fear of your influence. It's time for justice." Ethan felt a surge of hope as he watched Zoe stand her ground against Claire. The tide was turning, and he knew that whatever happened next, the community was ready to rise up for Malik and for themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town square of Maplewood, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The community had gathered for the highly anticipated event, a moment meant to celebrate unity, but instead, it felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Claire stood at the front, her posture rigid and her smile tightly controlled, masking the anxiety churning within her. She had worked tirelessly to maintain her image, but the weight of her deceit was beginning to suffocate her. Malik, on the other hand, stood slightly off to the side, his heart pounding in his chest. This was supposed to be his moment to shine, yet he felt like a shadow in a spotlight, the pressure mounting with every passing second. He glanced at Zoe, who was standing nearby, her expression a mixture of encouragement and concern. "You got this, Malik," she whispered, giving him a gentle nudge. "Just speak from your heart." He nodded, but doubt crept into his mind. What if Claire's influence was too strong? What if the community couldn't see past their biases? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself as the event progressed. He could feel Ethan's presence behind him, a steady force that reminded him that he wasn't alone in this fight. As the crowd murmured, Ethan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. The air crackled with anticipation as he approached the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice firm yet calm. "Today, we gather not just to celebrate, but to confront the shadows of injustice that have crept into our community." Claire's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She quickly regained her composure, but the unease in her eyes did not go unnoticed by those around her. Ethan continued, "We cannot ignore the truth any longer. Malik has been wrongfully accused, and it is time we address the root of this issue." The crowd shifted, some whispering among themselves, while others remained silent, absorbed in Ethan's words. "I've done my due diligence," he stated, locking eyes with Claire, who was now visibly sweating under the pressure of scrutiny. "I've found evidence, and it leads back to the actions of those who seek to maintain their power through fear." Claire's heart raced. She could feel her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. "Ethan, this is not the time," she started, but he interrupted her, raising his hand. "No, Claire, this is exactly the time. You may try to spin the narrative, but the truth is out there, and it will come to light." He paused for effect, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "I've spoken to many in this town, and they've shared their experiences. Malik is not just a victim of circumstance. He is a victim of systemic prejudice that we cannot allow to persist." The crowd began to murmur again, the tension palpable as the reality of the situation settled in. Claire's face flushed with anger, but she couldn't deny the growing dissent among the people. "You don't understand what you're doing, Ethan," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're tearing this community apart." Ethan stepped closer to the microphone, his voice unwavering. "No, Claire, I'm trying to put it back together. It's time we stop letting fear dictate our actions. You have a responsibility to this community, and it's time to own up to your mistakes." As he spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. They were witnessing a confrontation that had been brewing beneath the surface for far too long. Malik's heart raced as he watched the exchange, feeling a mix of fear and admiration for the detective who was daring to challenge Claire's authority. "Everyone deserves a chance to be heard," Ethan continued, glancing at Malik, who stood resolute despite the chaos around him. "Malik deserves that chance. The truth will set us free, but only if we are brave enough to embrace it." And with that, Claire's carefully constructed world began to unravel. Ethan's words resonated in the hearts of the people, igniting a flicker of hope in Malik's chest. It was a moment of reckoning, and as Claire's facade cracked, the community stood at a crossroads. Would they choose to follow the path of justice, or would they allow fear and prejudice to reign? As tensions in the community hall reached a boiling point as Ethan's revelation hung in the air like a charged storm cloud, the crowd was a cacophony of mixed emotions, outrage, disbelief, and a flicker of hope shimmering in the eyes of those who had begun to rally behind Malik. Ethan stood resolute at the microphone, his voice steady but firm, as he looked over the sea of faces, many of which had once been eager to support Claire. Claire Taylor has manipulated this community for far too long, he began, his voice rising over the noise. She has used her influence to silence those who dare to stand in her way. But today, we stand together to say enough is enough. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Ethan could see some familiar faces nodding in solidarity. Claire, standing near the back with a calculated expression, clenched her jaw, desperately trying to maintain her composure. The whispers of disbelief among her supporters grew louder, echoing the unease that had begun to spread. "Ethan, you're just trying to deflect the blame," Claire interjected, her voice slicing through the crowd. "You're trying to tear down a good woman's reputation because you're too stubborn to see the truth." Ethan took a step closer to the edge of the stage, leaning into the mic. "The truth?" he challenged, his brow furrowing. "The truth is that you planted drugs in Malik's backpack because you feared losing your grip on this community. You've let your prejudice dictate your actions, and now it's time for the truth to come to light." A woman in the audience stood up, her face flushed with emotion. "What gives you the right to accuse her?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it's like to be in her shoes." Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "I know what it's like to be on the side of injustice," he replied earnestly. "But today, we're here to talk about Malik, not Claire. We're here to confront the biases that have been ingrained in us and to support a young man who has been wronged." As the crowd began to quiet down, a man from the back stood up, his voice booming. "I witnessed what happened. I saw Malik's character firsthand. He's not a criminal." His declaration was met with a chorus of supportive shouts and applause, fueling the growing momentum in Malik's favor. In that moment of rising unity, another woman stood up, her hands shaking slightly. I remember when I moved here," she began, her voice wavering. "I was treated like an outsider because of my skin color. I thought things had changed, but seeing what happened to Malik, it just brings back all those memories. I can't stay silent anymore." Her testimony struck a chord with many in the audience. The atmosphere shifted, the air thick with shared pain and understanding. Ethan could feel the tide turning. "Thank you for sharing your story," he said gently. "It takes courage to stand up and speak out, especially when it feels like the world is against you. But your truth is powerful." Encouraged by the support, Malik stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "I just wanted to be part of something good. I thought I could contribute to our community, but instead, I've been made a target because of who I am." His words resonated deeply, and gasps of disbelief rippled through the crowd. "No one should have to fear being themselves," Ethan stated, his gaze unwavering. "This is a moment of reckoning for all of us. It's time to confront our biases and stand together for justice." As Malik continued to speak, sharing the pain of his experience and the anxiety that had plagued him since the accusations, the crowd began to rally behind him. "I want to be a voice for those who are afraid to speak out," he declared, his voice gaining strength. "We need to support one another and break down the barriers that keep us apart." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound reverberating off the walls of the community hall. In that moment, as Malik spoke from his heart, Ethan knew that the seeds of change had been sown. The community was beginning to recognize the injustices they had allowed to fester for too long. The fight for equality and justice had taken root, and there was no turning back now. The atmosphere was electric in the community center, where the event had taken a turn that no one had anticipated. Claire, once the queen bee of Maplewood, sat isolated in a corner, her face pale and drawn. The whispers around her were not of admiration but of judgment. She could feel the weight of the community's eyes, and it crushed her spirit. Zoe stood at the front of the room, her voice steady yet filled with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about Malik. It's about all of us confronting our biases and acknowledging the truth," she declared, her gaze fierce and unwavering. "We can't let fear dictate our actions. We have to stand together against injustice. Her words resonated through the room, igniting a spark of hope among the attendees. A man from the back shouted, "But what about Claire? She's been part of this town for years. How can we turn our backs on her?" Zoe responded, "It's not about turning our backs. It's about recognizing that even those we trust can make terrible mistakes. Claire's actions have hurt Malik and have hurt this community. We need to address that instead of justifying it." As she spoke, Claire clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could hear the murmured conversations, the disbelief, and the outrage directed at her. "They don't know the full story," she muttered under her breath, her pride battling with the shame swelling within her. Ethan, standing at the side, observed the room's shifting dynamics with a mix of concern and intrigue. He had seen the fractures in the community, but now he noticed something else, a collective strength beginning to form among the supporters of Malik. They were no longer afraid to voice their opinions, to stand up against the woman who had once wielded such power over them. "Claire, you need to speak up," called out a former ally of hers. "You owe us an explanation." With her heart racing, Claire stood, adjusting her blazer as if donning a suit of armor. I never meant for any of this to happen," she stammered, but the crowd's silence was deafening. "Malik's actions were not actions at all," Zoe interjected. "They were lies you created to protect your own interests. You need to own your mistakes." The community murmured in agreement, and Claire felt the ground shift beneath her. "You don't understand. I was scared. I thought—" "What?" a voice interrupted, laced with disbelief. "You thought ruining a young man's life would protect yours? That's not fear. That's cruelty." The crowd erupted into a chorus of agreement, and Claire felt her defenses crumble. The young woman's words pierced through her well-crafted facade, revealing the core of her actions. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Claire but for everyone present. Zoe continued, her voice rising above the clamor. "This is our moment to change. We can't allow fear to dictate our actions any longer. We must build a community where everyone is valued, regardless of their background. We must lift each other up, not tear each other down." Finally, Claire's voice broke through the noise, her tone desperate. "I never wanted it to be this way. I just wanted to protect what I had. And in doing so, you lost everything," a woman shouted back. "You lost our trust, and you almost destroyed Malik's future." The weight of those words sank into Claire. Her heart raced as she realized that the community she had taken for granted was now questioning her integrity. They were beginning to understand that her fear had manifested into actions that nearly ruined an innocent life. Zoe stepped forward, her expression softening slightly. "Claire, we all have biases. We all make mistakes. But it's time to own up to them. It's time for you to apologize to Malik." The room fell silent, and Claire's gaze flickered toward Malik, who stood at the back, flanked by his friends. The look in his eyes was a mix of hurt and defiance, and in that moment, she saw the depth of her betrayal. I'm sorry, Malik," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I let my fears control me." The crowd waited, breath held, as Malik stepped forward, his expression guarded yet resolute. "Your apology is a start, Claire, but actions speak louder than words. You have to show us that you can change." Claire nodded, tears brimming in her eyes as she realized that she had a long road ahead of her. The community may have turned against her, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path to redemption. The moment was bittersweet, filled with the weight of acknowledgement and the flicker of hope for a new beginning. The sun began to set over Maplewood, casting a warm glow on the faces of the townspeople who had gathered for the event. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and hope, but also a lingering tension from the recent upheaval. As the crowd dispersed after the speeches, Malik stood in the center of the square, surrounded by friends and supporters. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavily on his shoulders, yet he felt a flicker of determination igniting within him. Can you believe this is happening? Zoe exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. We actually did it. They're rallying behind you, Malik. This is just the beginning. Malik managed a small smile, though it felt foreign on his face. It's hard to believe, Zoe. Just a few days ago, I was facing charges for something I didn't do. Now, people are actually listening to me. Of course they are. You've shown everyone the truth, Zoe replied, her voice brimming with conviction. You stood up there and spoke from your heart. That's what matters. You're going to change things around here. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan approached Malik and Zoe, his expression earnest.
Hey Malik.
I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You were incredible up there. Thanks, Ethan. I still can't believe I had the courage to speak, Malik admitted, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his voice. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. You took that leap, Ethan affirmed, and look how far it's brought you. The community is starting to see things differently. It's important that you keep sharing your story. Malik nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude toward Ethan. I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when it felt like no one else did. Meanwhile, Claire stood on the periphery of the gathering, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. She had hoped to maintain her influence, to twist the narrative in her favor, but now she felt her grip slipping. The townspeople were rallying around Malik, and it was a movement she never expected. Look at them, Claire sneered, turning to her friend, Patricia, who stood beside her. They're all so easily swayed, so quick to turn against me. It's infuriating. Patricia glanced at her friend, concern etched on her face. Claire, maybe it's time to reflect on your actions. You can't control how people feel about what happened. Reflect? Claire laughed bitterly. I'm not the one who needs to reflect. They're the ones who have been blinded by their own biases. As the night deepened, Malik and Zoe found themselves surrounded by a group of supportive classmates who had stood with Malik throughout the ordeal. They shared stories, laughter, and a renewed sense of camaraderie. I can't believe we're actually making a difference, one of Malik's friends, Jamie, said, grinning. It feels like we're finally being heard. Yeah, but it's just one step, Malik reminded them, his tone serious. We can't stop here. There are still people who think this is just about me. It's about all of us. We need to keep pushing for change. Zoe nodded vigorously, her enthusiasm undiminished. We're going to keep fighting. We should organize more events, raise awareness, and make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug, Malik interjected, feeling a sense of unity wash over him. We owe it to everyone who's faced discrimination to keep this conversation going. As they talked, Ethan watched them from a distance, feeling a sense of fulfillment. He knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he also recognized that the seeds of change had been planted. The community was beginning to confront its own prejudices, and while it would take time, the journey towards justice and equality had truly begun. As the evening came to a close, Malik felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. The outpouring of support from his friends and the community filled him with hope. He realized that together, they could dismantle the walls that had long divided them. Let's do this together, Malik said, looking around at his friends. For all of us. And in that moment, under the stars that twinkled overhead, the spirit of unity and resilience filled the air, marking a new chapter for Maplewood, one where justice and equality would no longer be mere dreams, but a shared mission. As the atmosphere in the community hall buzzed with tension, Ethan stood at the front, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The event had drawn an unexpectedly large crowd, a mixture of supporters for Malik and those still clinging to Claire's narrative. He could hear whispers among the attendees, uncertainty hanging in the air like a thick fog. He glanced at Malik, who sat nervously in the front row, his face a blend of anxiety and hope. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing with the details he had uncovered over the last few days. He knew it was time to unveil the truth, but a part of him hesitated, worried about the implications it would have on the already fractured community. Silencing the whispers in his mind, he stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding. "Thank you all for being here today," Ethan began, his voice steady but firm. "I know these past few weeks have been incredibly difficult for everyone, especially for Malik, who has been wrongfully accused of something he did not do." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but there were still murmurs of dissent, remnants of Claire's influence lingering like a shadow. Ethan continued, "In my investigation, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew." He paused, scanning the crowd, and caught Claire's eyes, which were now wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. The drugs found in Malik's backpack were not planted by Claire, as many had believed. "I found evidence that points to someone else entirely, someone with a motive to frame Claire and cause chaos in our community." Gasps erupted from the audience, and Malik's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" he whispered to Zoe, who sat beside him, gripping his hand tightly. Ethan cleared his throat, pushing onward. "I won't reveal the name just yet, but this person wanted to take Claire down, and in doing so, they targeted Malik to create a diversion. We've all been played." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, questions flying through the air. "Who? Who is it?" someone shouted from the back. Ethan raised his hand to calm the crowd. "I promise you all, I will explain everything. But first, I want to share the evidence I found." He pulled out a folder from his bag, flipping it open to reveal photographs and documents. These show interactions between Claire's rival and a known dealer in our town. They were conspiring together to create a scandal that would tear our community apart. Claire's face paled, her certainty crumbling. "This is absurd," she exclaimed, her voice shaking. "You're trying to ruin me, just like Malik's friends tried to." Ethan ignored her outburst, focusing instead on the crowd. "This isn't about ruining anyone. It's about uncovering the truth. The person who planted the drugs in Malik's bag was trying to manipulate us all. They wanted to distract us from the real issues we face in our community, issues of racism and injustice that we must confront together." A woman in the back stood up, her voice trembling. "But what about Claire? She's still responsible for the harm she caused." "Absolutely," Ethan agreed, locking eyes with Claire once more. "Claire has her own prejudices to confront, but we cannot ignore that someone else has been playing both sides against each other. We need to focus on healing and understanding, not only blaming." The crowd began to murmur again, this time with a mix of anger and confusion. Malik, feeling the adrenaline surge through him, stood up. "I just want the truth. I want everyone to know I didn't do anything wrong. And I don't want this to be about Claire's past or anyone else's. We need to stand together." Ethan nodded, encouraged by Malik's bravery. "That's right, Malik. The real fight is against the systemic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place. We need to unite against injustice, regardless of where it comes from." The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air. Slowly, people began to nod, some murmuring their agreement. Claire, however, remained frozen, her mind racing as she realized her grip on power was slipping further away. As Ethan concluded the meeting, he felt a glimmer of hope. "We have a long road ahead of us, but if we stand together, we can create a community that truly embraces equality and justice for all." The crowd erupted into applause, Malik receiving the loudest cheers. As the meeting ended, people began to approach Malik, offering support and apologies. The air was thick with a sense of resolution, and amidst the chaos, a new chapter was beginning for Maplewood, a chapter built on unity and understanding, despite the tumult that had preceded it.